Could you talk about your gear, Mike?
Okay, well, I use a Guild X500. I bought that in 1993. Been using it ever since. I like the big fat hollow body sound, so it's similar to an L5, Gibson L5. I like to use heavier strings, so I use a 13 type set of round wounds. A lot of jazz guitarists use flat ones. I don't like them, so I use round wounds. I made up my own set. It's an individual set. I don't buy a particular brand set already set. I always have to buy single strings. I use a Music Man with two 10-inch speakers. That Music Man with two 10 has kind of become the jazz guitar amp of the past few years, especially here in Chicago, because it's a solid state preamp, but a tube power amp. So the amp's a little lighter, and it just has a very unique sound. That's Leo Fender's last amp, I think, that he designed. Mm-hmm. Is in the late 70s. And then I have some effects that I use. I like to use a little reverb, depending on the band. If I doing the big band or my funk band, I have a wah, I have a line 6 delay with a looping on it. I use a Zvex factory fuzz distortion pedal, or with Fuzz Factory, distortion pedal. But those are just for specialty gigs. If I'm playing jazz, it's just a chord into the amp with the reverb on, or through a reverb pedal, depending on what I'm feeling that day. Mm-hmm. Or if the stage is shaky, I can't use my spring reverb, so I got to use my digital.
You play with one of the legendary Chicago tenor players, Von mm-hmm. Freeman, mm-hmm. and there's always talk of the Chicago tenor sound mm-hmm. with people like Gene Ammons,
yep.
Johnny Griffin,
mm-hmm.
Clifford Jordan,
John
Gilmore.
That's right. Oh, you know
would you say there's a similar Chicago guitar sound? How would you describe the Chicago guitar sound, and maybe if you could talk a little about the Chicago jazz scene today?
Well, I would say the guitar thing has exploded in Chicago the past 10 years. When I was coming up as jazz guitar players, of the young guys, it was just myself and Jeff Parker. There was a guy, Dave Sampson here, who also played with Charlie. And that was it, if I can remember. And then Neil Alger was another guitarist that came up, but he's a few years younger than me. So, and it was just the three of us. And then the jazz guitarists to go see at the time, like the real swinging jazz players, I guess there was Bobby Broom, and there were some other great guitar players here that were more fusion or modern oriented, but as far as swinging style guitar player, jazz organ cat, it was just Bobby Broom that I can think of, unless there's somebody I'm forgetting. Then all of a sudden, in the late 90s, it just exploded, and now there's a good 30 great jazz guitar players here, and a lot of cats get a lot of influence from Bobby Broom. Bobby Broom's definitely probably the most influential sound in Chicago. Though a lot of the cats here, they come from various types of scenes. So you got guys like Jeff Parker, who is an incredible jazz player, but can play just like feedback noise and make it sound amazing. And just use white noise and make a beautiful improvisation with that. And he's a master of that style. And then there's younger cats who are following in his footsteps. So I would say he's probably the second most influential guitar player in Chicago, I would think, as far as the modern sensibilities of guitar players using effects and sounds and trying to mix rock and jazz elements and being very open to anything and everything. Mm-hmm. So and then there's a lot of guitar players here trying to play straight ahead, young and older. So that's
cool. Could you talk a little about some of the style terminology you're using? Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask you was about was the big world of jazz music and all the genres and styles within it. You mentioned things like straight ahead and
right.
modern, and
right.
there's avant-garde, and there's
right.
hard bop, and are those categories still?
Well, no. You see, I think now it's like you were talking about the Chicago tenor sound. Before the ease of access through, especially the internet, regions became very unique because you couldn't go here. You maybe could get a record of somebody, but you couldn't hear them live all the time. You couldn't go, you could buy one record. You couldn't go like download 50 records from a file sharing site. So cats really developed their own sound in various regions. Now you can get all of these sounds from anywhere in the world. So, I mean, you do have these categories. I really think the categories for me are more marketing categories than they are in actual real categories. I don't hear any difference, for example, when you hear, trying to make a good example. I mean, one example that's coming to my mind is you listen to Bobby Broom play with his organ trio or with him just playing in a regular bass and drum trio. He plays the same. You know, he's just playing his voice. And I think that a real jazz musician does that. They just play the things that they hear within whatever the context is. I think now there are more opportunities to play in different contexts. So you'll see more guitar players that play like in an experimental rock band where you've got pedals and all kinds of crazy stuff. And that same guitar player the next day will be playing jazz standards at a Chinese restaurant. You know, and then maybe the next day he's playing in an organ trio at the Green Mill, and then playing in a big band or something. You know what I'm saying? It's just, the styles. I don't think you have these like really concrete styles like you had, and I think those are more for marketing purposes than they are in reality.
When did you start playing jazz?
Well, I was playing guitar, picked up guitar when I was 10, and when I was 12, my guitar teacher showed me the George Benson cookbook. He just said, you should check this out, this is great. And I just said, okay. And I told my mom about it, and she got me the album, and I just started learning the heads on that stuff. And then I got that compilation record called Blue Benson after that, and I was learning, I learned his solo and the head on Billy's Bounce on there. And then I really got into it for a couple years, and then I got away from it and just got into all the rock stuff that most teenagers, boys get into, and then went to school for jazz, and then really got into it when I was in college.
Can you talk about some of your early guitars, your first guitar?
Gosh, I don't even remember what my first guitar was. I remember it was a Les Paul copy of some sort, and then I had another guitar which was pretty bad. I don't remember what it was. And then my father, when I was 14, surprised me by getting a Gibson 335. And it was because we'd gone to one music store, and I just liked it. I looked at it, I said, that guitar is so cool looking. And then he had a friend who knew the owner of a North Side store called Minstrel Music up in Niles.
Yeah.
And the cat sold him the 335, I think, for like $400. And so that was my first guitar. And then I had a Roland guitar synth. Remember that one with the bar across the top? I had one of those. I had a Kramer with the Floyd Rose when I was in high school. I had a Kramer Farrington, which is a really cheesy acoustic guitar. But I got rid of those all before I went to college. And then I picked up the Guild X500 a couple years after I left college, and that's what I've been playing since.
Yeah, you get a beautiful tone with that.
Thanks, man.
Can you talk about the important relationship between blues and jazz, and how the blues, factors into your playing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I really think, well, let me put it like this. I think my favorite wisdom that's been passed on to me from a great veteran, Von Freeman, is that he told me once, okay, I hear a guy play on an up-tempo. He can play all kinds of stuff. That's great. I want to hear him play a slow blues and a ballad. If he can play with heart and soul on a slow blues and a ballad, then I'll think he can play. So for me, after hearing that and listening to him play slow blues, because we always play a slow blues every night, he plays his dedication to Sunnyland Slim, it's like, to me, blues is like an essential part of the voice of jazz. It's basically, to me, jazz is kind of like, you have to have that blues feeling. But the thing that Vaughn says is he doesn't like to hear like the straight up B.B. King and what's going on. He likes that stuff, but he doesn't want to hear that in jazz. It's kind of like you want to get the feeling of blues, but you've got to get it in the jazz sensibility. So, I've listened to lots of blues guitar players. I don't know my history very well enough, but the blues feeling always has to be there for me. So sometimes some of the modern cats that I hear don't have any blues feeling whatsoever, and it leaves me cold. To me, that there's a heart thing that's lost. So the blues vocabulary, the things that you hear blues guitar players play, have to be part of the melodic concept with all the sophistication of the harmonies and the rhythms that you hear in jazz.